where I can see them. She's having a heart attack. I'm a doctor. I'm giving her CPR.
Stop talking. Back up now.
She needs compression. Move away now.
He was already on his knees when the officers arrived. Hands locked. Rhythm steady. Eyes fixed on the woman beneath him. He never looked up. He couldn't afford to. Dr. Andre Harris was jogging through Millbrook Park on a Sunday morning when a woman collapsed on the trail directly ahead of him. Without hesitation, he dropped beside her, confirmed she had no pulse, and began performing CPR, precise, controlled, exactly as he had done dozens of times in an emergency room. A bystander watching from a nearby bench did not see a rescue. She saw a black man crouched over an unresponsive white woman, and she called 911 before she took a single step toward them. When officers Dalton Reeves and Marcus Webb arrived and saw Dr. Harris delivering chest compressions, they did not assess the scene. They did not ask a question. They deployed pepper spray directly into the face of a man saving a life, pulled him off the woman mid-compression, and placed him in handcuffs on the pavement while she lay motionless behind him, unattended, unmonitored, still in cardiac arrest. What those officers did not know, what they would not discover until paramedics arrived moments later, was that they had just assaulted a board-certified emergency room physician with 11 years of experience. That their failure to assess the scene had interrupted the only intervention standing between that woman and permanent brain damage or death. And that their actions would trigger a $2.5 million federal lawsuit and become one of the most closely examined examples of racially biased policing ever documented in this country. Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe a doctor performing CPR should never have to fear being arrested for saving a life, like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments whether this story needs to be heard. Let's get into it. The woman was already on the ground by the time anyone registered what had happened. One moment she had been moving along the running trail at Millbrook Park, a Sunday morning regular, dressed in a pale green jacket, earbuds in, pace steady. The next, her legs simply stopped working. There was no stumble, no reach for a railing, no cry for help. Her body dropped forward with the blunt, indifferent weight of something suddenly without will. She hit the pavement and did not move again. Dr. Andre Harris had been 15 feet behind her. He was already pulling his earbuds out before she landed. He covered the distance in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. His hands moved before a conscious decision had been made, the kind of muscle memory that only forms after years of emergency rooms, trauma bays, and resuscitations carried out under fluorescent lights with a team of nurses watching the monitor. He rolled her onto her back. He checked her airway. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck and held them there for exactly 3 seconds. Nothing. He pressed his ear close to her mouth. Her chest did not rise. No breath moved across his skin. His palms came together over the center of her sternum, fingers interlocked, arms straight, and he began. The compressions were deep and deliberate, 30 per cycle, the heel of his hand driving down with enough force to circulate blood mechanically through a heart that had forgotten how to beat on its own. He tilted her head back between cycles, cleared her airway, delivered 2 rescue breaths, and returned immediately to compressions. Sweat gathered at his temples. His arms burned at the shoulders. He did not slow down. He did not look up. A small cluster of joggers had stopped on the trail around him. Some watched in silence. Others exchanged glances over his shoulder, their faces cycling through uncertainty, the discomfort of witnessing something they couldn't immediately categorize. One of them stepped away from the group. She moved toward the tree line at the edge of the trail, already raising her phone, already speaking before the line connected. The words she used were not medical. They were not calm. They described something urgent and dangerous, a man and a woman on the ground, physical contact, the woman not responding. The dispatcher asked for clarification. She could not offer it. What she had decided she was seeing had already locked into place inside her, and the language that followed was shaped by that decision rather than by what was actually in front of her. The call was brief. The dispatch that followed was not. Around the scene, something subtle shifted. 2 or 3 onlookers took a half step back. A woman near the trail's edge pulled her dog closer. The crowd did not break, but the quality of its attention changed. Whispers replaced silence. Doubt, once introduced, moved quickly. The sirens came before the paramedics. A patrol cruiser entered the park at the south gate with its lights running, moving fast across the footpath toward the gathered crowd. Officers Dalton Reeves and Marcus Webb had been less than 4 minutes from the park when the call came through: assault in progress, black male suspect, female victim unresponsive on the ground. They had not been given more than that. They had not asked for more than that. What they saw when they stepped out of the vehicle was a black man on his knees over a white woman who was not moving, his hands pressing repeatedly into her chest, his body weight engaged, his face set in total concentration. Neither of them paused to interpret it. Neither of them consulted the crowd of witnesses standing 3 feet away. Dr. Harris registered the sirens at the edge of his awareness and did not break rhythm. He was at compression 19 of 30. She still had no pulse. There was no version of this moment in which he stopped. The officers called out commands as they approached. Their voices were loud, clipped, carrying the compressed authority of people accustomed to being obeyed within seconds. They told him to stop. They told him to put his hands where they could see them. They told him to get away from her. Dr. Harris did not stop. He raised one hand slightly, a gesture, not a surrender, and continued compressions. He was trying to signal something. He was trying to communicate that there was a reason he was doing what he was doing, and that the reason was urgent, and that interrupting it would have consequences that could not be undone. The officers read his continued movement as noncompliance. They were now less than 10 feet away. The pepper spray hit him across the face at close range. The effect was immediate, his eyes sealed shut against the chemical burn, his hands reflexively rising toward his face before he caught himself, trying to maintain some contact with the patient, trying to keep working through what felt like fire spreading across his skin. He managed 2 more compressions, half-blind, before Officer Webb's hands found his arms and pulled him back with enough force to take him entirely off the ground. He was turned face down onto the pavement. His hands, still reaching, still oriented toward the woman behind him, were pulled to the small of his back. The woman lay still on the trail. No one moved toward her. The officers were occupied. The crowd had retreated further, some frozen, some already filming, none of them trained for what they were watching. The compressions had stopped. The airway management had stopped. Every second that passed without intervention was a second in which the window that Dr. Harris had been holding open with his bare hands was drawing closer to shut. A voice somewhere in the crowd said something, a question, a challenge, the beginning of a sentence that didn't finish. It dissolved into the ambient noise without changing anything. There was a lanyard around his neck, clipped flat against his chest during the run. It had swung loose during the struggle, and a laminated badge now rested against the pavement beside him, the City General Hospital logo visible to anyone who looked down. Nobody looked down. His technique had been precise enough that 2 of the joggers who had watched him work would later describe it, unprompted, as looking exactly like what they'd seen in a first aid training video. Not frantic. Not violent. Methodical. The officers did not know what they had interrupted. Not yet. A second set of sirens entered the park from the north gate. Different pitch. Different cadence. Not a patrol car. The paramedics had arrived. Officer Reeves stood over the handcuffed men on the ground, his breathing still elevated, still certain of what had happened. Officer Webb had his radio in his hand. The crowd had gone very quiet. And the woman on the trail had still not moved. What happened in the next 90 seconds would not stay in that park. It would not stay in that city. It would travel, in body cam footage, in witness statements, in a federal lawsuit brief, in the testimony of the woman whose heart had stopped, and it would force a reckoning that nobody standing on that trail on a Sunday morning had yet begun to imagine. The paramedics moved differently than the officers had. There was no pause at the perimeter of the scene, no visual sweep for threat. They came in low and fast, bags already open, eyes already reading the woman on the ground, her color, her stillness, the absence of any chest movement. The lead paramedic dropped beside her within 4 seconds of leaving the vehicle. His partner was already unzipping the defibrillator case before his knees hit the pavement. The third paramedic stopped. She had been moving toward the equipment bag when something at the edge of the scene pulled her attention sideways. A man in running clothes, face down on the pavement, wrists restrained behind him, eyes swollen half shut and streaming. He was not resisting. He was not speaking. He was oriented entirely toward the woman on the ground, his body still angled in her direction as though some part of him refused to fully accept that he had been removed from the situation. The paramedic looked at him, then at the officer standing above him, then back at the woman her colleagues were now working over. The geometry of the scene told her something. She did not yet have the language for what it told her, but the shape of it was wrong in a way that registered immediately in her chest. The lanyard had come fully loose during the struggle. It lay on the pavement beside him now, the laminated badge face up, readable to anyone at standing height. The third paramedic read it. She read it again. She crossed to the lead paramedic and said something low, and he looked up from compressions long enough to follow her eye line to the badge on the ground, and then to the restrained man, and then the quality of his focus shifted in a way that was visible even from across the trail. He looked at Officer Reeves. The look was not aggressive. It was the particular expression of a person who has just understood something that cannot be ununderstood, and who is already calculating what that understanding requires of them. The word moved through the paramedic team in seconds. It reached the edge of the bystander cluster a moment after that. A woman near the back of the crowd covered her mouth with one hand. Two joggers looked at each other. An older man who had been filming on his phone lowered it slightly, then raised it again, this time with more deliberate intention. Officer Reeves did not move. His posture remained fixed, the stance of someone still committed to a version of events that the scene around him had already stopped supporting. The defibrillator was ready. The automated voice moved through its analysis, and the park went quiet around it, the ambient noise of a Sunday morning suspended in the few seconds it took the machine to render its verdict. The shock delivered. The woman's body responded with the small, involuntary motion that anyone who has witnessed resuscitation recognizes immediately. The paramedics did not celebrate it. They continued working, checking, adjusting, their movements economical and uninterrupted. 40 seconds later, the lead paramedic pressed two fingers to the side of her neck and held them there. A pulse, faint, unsteady, but present. It was the kind of moment that does not announce itself loudly. It registered in the paramedic's posture before it registered anywhere else, a slight change in the set of his shoulders, a breath released through the nose rather than the mouth. The woman remained unconscious. She would need to be transported immediately. But the window that had been closing was still open, and the life that had been balanced on the thinnest possible threshold had not, in the end, crossed over. The witnesses did not wait to be asked. They came forward without prompting, joggers, a cyclist who had stopped at the edge of the path, a couple who had been walking a dog near the fountain. Their accounts were not identical in every detail, but they converged on the same essential sequence. A woman collapsed, a man responded immediately, the response was precise and sustained, and then the officers arrived and ended it before anyone had been given the chance to explain what was happening. Officer Reeves attempted once, briefly, and without the confidence of someone who believed his own argument, to account for what his dispatch information had described. The attempt did not hold. It could not hold. It was not built to withstand the specific weight of what the people standing around him were now saying, calmly and in detail, with the composure of individuals who had watched the full sequence from start to finish and understood every part of it. The crowd had the information. Some of them had it from the beginning. And still, the moment unfolded the way it did. If you were standing on that trail and you saw what they saw, would you have stepped forward to defend him, or would you have stayed back? Drop, defend, or watch in the comments, and tell us why. There is no wrong answer. But there is an honest one. It would not emerge until later that afternoon, when the woman regained partial consciousness in the trauma bay at City General and a nurse, reviewing her prior admission records in preparation for the attending physician's briefing, noticed a name at the bottom of a discharge summary from 6 weeks earlier. Dr. Andre Harris had been the attending physician on duty the night she was brought in with chest pain that initial triage had logged as anxiety-related. He had ordered the additional cardiac workup that the intake assessment had not flagged. He had caught the early arrhythmia marker that the standard panel would have missed. He had sent her home with a referral, a follow-up appointment, and a warning about exertion until the cardiology consult was completed. She had not made the appointment. She had not recognized him on the trail, she had never seen him outside a hospital context, had never seen him in running clothes, had never seen his face in sunlight rather than fluorescent light. He had not recognized her either. Patients cycle through an emergency room in volume, and the encounter 6 weeks prior had been resolved and closed. But he had saved her life before. And on a Sunday morning in a public park, with no equipment and no team and no context except the training built into his hands over 11 years, he had done it again. The second rescue did not know it was a second rescue. It happened anyway. The footage reached the internet before the ambulance reached the hospital. Multiple angles, phone cameras, one dashcam from a vehicle parked near the south gate, a fitness watch with video capability held by a jogger who had stopped nearby, were uploaded within the hour. The moment of interruption was visible in each of them, a man performing compressions, the officers arriving, the pepper spray deployed mid-rescue, the figure pulled away from the patient. The badge on the ground. The woman left unattended. The comment sections filled faster than the platforms could moderate them. By evening, the clip had been viewed several million times across multiple platforms. By the following morning, it had been covered by national outlets, medical associations, and law enforcement commentators across the political spectrum. The response was not divided in the usual ways. The footage did not leave significant room for competing interpretations. What it showed was visible and sequential and permanent. The internal affairs process moved with unusual speed, in part because the evidentiary record required very little construction. The body camera footage, the bystander recordings, the paramedic testimony, and the dispatch log formed a sequence that the department's own review board described in its preliminary findings as leaving no credible alternative account of events. Officer Reeves was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. His termination followed the completion of the formal review, a process that took 11 days, expedited under the pressure of public documentation and departmental leadership that understood what continued inaction would cost. Officer Webb received a suspension and mandatory retraining. Neither outcome was, by itself, sufficient to address what the incident represented. Both outcomes were, at minimum, honest about what the evidence required. The police department issued a statement. It was carefully worded, as such statements tend to be. What it communicated, beneath the institutional language, was that something had gone wrong in a way that could not be attributed to individual error alone, that the assumptions which had moved those officers from their vehicle to a handcuffed doctor in under 2 minutes were not aberrations. They were a pattern. And the department, for once, did not dispute that framing publicly. Dr. Harris was released from the scene after the paramedics confirmed the patient's stabilization and the lead responder made clear, in terms that required no elaboration, what had occurred and who was responsible for nearly allowing it to become irreversible. He did not make a statement to the officers. He did not address the crowd. He stood for a moment at the edge of the trail, eyes still red and partially swollen, and looked in the direction the ambulance had gone. Then he retrieved the lanyard from the pavement, clipped it back against his chest, and walked toward the park's north exit at a measured pace, not hurried, not defeated, not performing composure for an audience, but genuinely composed in the way that people sometimes are when they have lived inside high-stakes clarity for so long that ordinary chaos no longer reshapes them. The crowd watched him go. Quietly. With the specific stillness that follows a collective reckoning. The civil lawsuit was filed 8 weeks after the incident and settled 22 months later for $2.5 million. The settlement included financial compensation and a binding set of policy reforms, mandatory assessment protocols before use of force in ambiguous public situations, updated training on recognizing active medical intervention, and the establishment of an independent review structure for use of force incidents involving racial bias allegations. The case entered the training literature of police departments in 14 states. It was cited in 3 separate congressional testimonies on emergency response reform. Medical schools began using the timeline of the incident, the arrest, the gap in compressions, the defibrillation, the delayed pulse return, as a teaching case on the physiological consequences of interrupted resuscitation. The woman Dr. Harris saved made a full recovery. She testified voluntarily in the civil proceedings. Her statement was not long. It did not need to be. Millbrook Park reopened to its usual Sunday traffic the following weekend. The stretch of trail where it had happened looked exactly as it always had: pavement, grass, the low hum of the city behind the tree line. No marker. No memorial. No visible record of what had occurred there. The joggers ran their loops. The families came with their dogs and their strollers. The benches filled with people scrolling through phones and watching the morning pass. But a handful of people who returned that week slowed their pace as they moved through that particular stretch of path. They did not stop. They did not point. They simply moved through it with a slightly different quality of attention, the way people sometimes do when a place has held something that cannot entirely be left behind. Dr. Andre Harris was back in the emergency room at City General the following Tuesday morning. He arrived at 6:45, changed into his scrubs, reviewed the overnight patient log, and began his shift. He did not speak about what had happened in the park. He did not need to. The work was the same as it had always been. The hands were the same hands. Sometimes the distance between life and death is not measured in equipment or expertise. It is measured in the 3 seconds it takes to look at what is actually in front of you, and choose to see it clearly, before you choose to act. Dr. Andre Harris knew how to do that. On the morning that mattered most, the people with the authority to stop him did not. That gap, between what was happening and what was assumed, is where the story lives. And where the lesson must be carried forward.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.